Welcome to another episode of Mind Force. I'm Nate Shear, and together we'll explore the mindsets and ideas that shape our lives. Today we'll be talking about traumatic brain injuries, a story of recovery and overcoming adversity, a little bit about trauma therapy and healing from that trauma. We'll start with the background. Let's start with a quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what brings you here today?
Hey, thank you for having me, Nate. I'm Daniel Gospodarek. I am a trauma therapist based outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a little area called Kenosha. And I primarily work with men who've experienced trauma and helping them heal, reconnect with their mind, body, improve their relationships and their self-confidence. And just here to speak a little bit about that, as well as traumatic brain injuries. And that's kind of what directed me to become a therapist.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Daniel, for taking your time. I think time is such a precious commodity, and I think a lot of us could say we're too busy and things like that. So taking a time, even an hour out of your day to help others, I think is pretty noble and something a lot of people don't do. We'll transition into the warm-up. I'm curious, Daniel, can you share a little bit about yourself and what led you to the journey of healing?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it was July 2009 in a car accident. At first, didn't know what happened because I was unconscious. But then, as the pain meds wear off and stuff like that, you kind of start to see the reality. But needed to have brain surgery, stroke in my left frontal lobe, fractured skull, collapsed lung, some hearing loss, some left ear. But, from there it was, this kind of weird transition out of a chemically induced coma and then into ICU and then inpatient rehab, speech therapy for 17 months, and then physical therapy for 3 months.
Dang, that's rough. What do you think was the most difficult part of that journey?
Most difficult. There's quite a few experiences
It's all
in there
difficult, right?
that passed that threshold. Yeah, I'm just kind of reflecting on some of it. But I mean, from a physical standpoint, you go from being a highly active 17-year-old that works out 3 times a week, 4 times a week, to losing 20 pounds because you're on a feeding tube and, you can barely walk. So like that was pretty challenging.
Mm. Yeah, that's pretty rough. What do you think is the biggest thing that people don't understand about TBI?
I want to say but this isn't the hardest thing. I think it's the most contemplative piece is that they're so unique to every person. Somebody could have experienced mine and may have died, may have never spoke again. And then there's me that, has made it through. And then there are some people who have more minor TBIs and their entire life is just gone. They can't work, He leaves around them because maybe they have challenges with anger or impulsiveness. Like that complexity piece, I feel like is the biggest unknown thing, but that's also unknown in the medical community about why is this, right? It's just, just drawing straws.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you noticed there's anything where people judge you or kind of miscategorize you, or how do you go about, do you kind of educate people as you go, or what's been something where it's been a difficult situation where someone didn't quite understand you?
Yeah. So I mean, the difference between brain injured or brain injury versus brain damaged, I think the brain damage piece carries a little stigma, and I'll say something around those conversations. But it's kind of tricky, you have a brain injury, and yet when you go to apply for jobs, they're like, do you have any disabilities? And traumatic brain injury is on there. And I'm like, I mean, technically I have one, but do I feel like I have a disability? No. So it's where do I fall on that threshold? Will they not consider me for a job if I check that box? Right? Will they consider me for a job if I check that box more so? Right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. So have you seen the after effects? Is there a way that goes?
Well, I don't know what the after effects are. I mean, either you get them or you don't, right? I'm not in the decision-making process, and I don't know what goes on back there behind HR's doors, whatever. But it just kind of brings up I'm like, huh, that's interesting, right?
Now I'm kind of intrigued. Does it help you? Because I could really, like you said, it seems really 50-50. Oh, we got to give this guy a chance. Or oh, we don't want to mess with that. That
right.
could really go either way. Well, I
Right.
hope they keep it, some type of unbiased and give everyone a good opportunity.
I hope so
But
too.
yeah, hopefully. Before we get into the three main pillars, Daniel, I wanted to see if you had a question for me.
Yeah, what's not why did you start this podcast, right? But what is your end goal with the podcast?
My end goal is really, I think, education and awareness and just making people better. I mean, I guess that's vague and maybe cliche. I feel like sometimes I'm kind of a walking cliche, a lot of the things I say. But if that's something I truly feel, even if it is cliche, I kind of have to say it, even though
Mhm.
it might feel that category. But yeah, I just want people to be better. I really started the show, off a basis of losing my grandma to mental health as a kid and her not being able to express herself and things like that. And so I just hope that some story that's shared by myself or a guest connects with somebody and somehow it enhances or improves someone's life. I think that's really it. Like if we, improve some lives, help some people, really save anyone from making a permanent decision for a temporary problem. There's so many things going on, self-isolating and getting to those downward spiral. If we can get, people out of those things. But even on the daily stuff, I mean, that's kind of the extreme case. But we've talked about journaling on here and meditation and deep breaths and things like that. So, really, if someone takes something from this, puts it into practice, takes those deep breaths, and their life's a little bit better, like the time and effort that I put on, I think it really is all worth it. So, yeah, I just hope, something helps somebody along the way. And I think you never know, because I know I've had guests, I've written them like, oh, I don't want to come on the show. I don't have something that's valuable enough. I don't
Mhm.
think that's true. We have no idea what someone needs out there. So let's record it. Let's put it out there. Maybe it doesn't help me, but it's not about me or, the guests particularly. It's really about whoever's out there. So I'll record whatever and we'll put it out there and hopefully it'll help someone along the way. Maybe someone's suffering from something similar. And I think that's like the core of like losing my grandma. I think like she didn't feel like she could talk to anyone else. And so she just spiraled. I think
Mhm.
hearing it, even if it's something parallel, I think that's another important thing. Like we might not find someone that's been the exact same. There's
Right.
8 billion of us and we've all lived a little different life. But if someone's going through something that's even parallel, I think that already makes you feel a little bit better. Okay, bad stuff, but they've gotten through it. And so the one thing I want to stress on this show is the success afterwards. I feel like a lot of times we talk about the warning signs and the negative aspects. And in the military, we have to go to all these classes and talk about, people giving away their stuff and the warning signs when their people are suicidal and things like that. But we don't seem to do a good job of highlighting them after them getting the car they wanted, them getting married to the person they liked, and these things that happened on the successful side after bouncing back. And that was
Mhm.
way longer than you wanted, Daniel.
Oh, it was a good one. One of my old supervisors, just to kind of piggyback off that, shared with me how she approaches like her therapeutic work is like you may not change that person that you're directly listening or is listening or engaging in therapy, but you may change somebody else's that is listening to that person. And she used the example of like most of us have heard of Helen Keller, right? But how many of us know who her teacher's name was? Right? So we forget.
That's a good one. Yeah,
Right,
I
and,
like
like
that.
and that's how I look at, like, some of these podcast episodes and doing this, right? Like, you don't know who you're gonna hit or who it's gonna resonate with or who is it gonna resonate with and share somebody that it may impact, right? Like, that ripple effect, so
Yeah, absolutely. You never know. We just got to put it out there and see what it connects with. Your first pillar, Daniel, is the TBI story. So if you could walk us through the moment that changed your life.
yeah. So, July 2009, we were coming back from it was me, I was in the passenger seat, just a one-car say just, but it was I mean, I'm thankful it was only us, but just a one-car rollover. Yeah, I asked look drop something, and I looked down to and the driver, was pulling off a panel to get to the I dropped my house key to get to the panel, and the last thing I remember is just seeing the different circuit colors after the panel and then waking up and actually I thought I was in France because I never had gone through like a big time change before. I don't know, like I guess going through a coma is kind of different than just going to sleep and waking up from a strange dream. But I thought I was in France and I had gone through the time change. It was very bizarre. And then like, as I'm coming to, I'm like looking around, I was like, this is not France. And then you see like the heart monitors and the tube sticking out and everywhere, and so it's kind of like a matrix thing, if you will, right? Like reality is distorted. But yeah, then you slow and steady from there. They kept me in a coma for 3 days. They would put me in for the next few days in the evening and let me come out at night, or I'm sorry, during the day. It's 10 days ICU. First steps were with a wheelchair and 3 nurses around me, and 7 days inpatient rehab. And the fatigue is horrible with a traumatic brain injury for some people, and mine took about 2.5 years to fade. Some people have fatigue that never fades. I've met, and some people don't have any fatigue. So that was rough. And then it was inside that 7-day rehab that I was like, I'm probably going to land somewhere in these types of professions, just not knowing where: nursing, PT, OT, stuff like that. And then after 7 days, 17 months of speech therapy, almost 2 to 3 times a week, and then physical therapy for 2 to 3 times a week too. And yeah, from there it was just a lot of the mental struggles at times were really hard, especially once I started getting concussions from just like very nebulous things, like bonking my head on a open cupboard, like things you would just kind of write off as, if you didn't have a TBI, would give me a concussion. And then anxiety and worry, all that stuff started spiraling. So I'd have to go to bed at 8 to fall asleep by 10. Like that self-anger, all that stuff was in there. So just like you really start to see like the mental health aspects that just kind of spiral off after a while. But then, we were talking about the physical piece is hard, right, with the TBI, but so too, like being 17, 18 at the time, so finishing up high school and not being able to stay out at bonfires and stuff with friends. So you lose some of those social connections. Like there's grief and loss that comes with that.
Yeah, a lot to process there. So for the fatigue,
Mm.
are you mentioning like physical fatigue, or is that more like mind fog type thing, or just physically tired?
Both. The mind fog was there, and that lasted a long time, but just the physical fatigue, I would sleep almost like 14 to 16 hours a day. So I would go to school for 2-3 hours for high school, come home, take a 2 or 3 hour nap, be up for 4 or 5 hours, and then still go to sleep by 8 before my concussion started happening. And I would sleep till 6, like nothing.
See, how'd you get through classes and things like that? You just kind of had that modified schedule?
Yeah, so my first semester had 2 half days, and then second semester had a full day and a half day, and I was still taking those types of naps on the half days.
Huh.
Yeah, it was
That's
a lot.
wild. That's a whole other challenge by itself, isn't
I
it?
know.
Huh. So I kind of asked earlier, hopefully it's not a repeat, but what do you think the biggest challenges were in the early stages? And do you have any advice for someone that is in an early stage of an injury like that?
Yeah, so it was in the early stage, but it also was like a year out. It's like this impulse just to get it done, right? And just heal, and so you can get back to your world, your life, how it was. And like it's almost like the more attention you give that impulse, like the stronger it becomes. And there's so much acceptance, and if you want to call it like even like self-forgiveness for just like being patient and being in the present moment and letting your body do what it needs to do. Right? Because you can't rush that process. It's just like training you don't set out one day and you're like, okay, I'm going to run a marathon or even an ultra, an ultra run or something like that. Like it takes a lot of training and a lot of patience, even though there's a lot of effort being put in on the back end. But there are some times where I was just like, boom, like let's get this done, but it does not work like that. And results in a lot of anger. And I can tell you that from personal experience because I was trying to rush myself.
Be patient. I'm sure that is much easier said than done.
But that's cliche too, right?
Yeah, be patient. Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds good. I'm curious, did you have a girlfriend or do sports or like your friends? Were there other things that you kind of lost that, most people might not think about, kind of the second and third order effects? Or was there a lot of
Yeah.
support around you from like your friends and stuff?
Yeah, so I had a lot of support around my friends. My high school worked really was really open to like adjusting my schedules, and even like had an assembly to say, hey, like, well, not an assembly just for this, but like, welcome back to school. Side note, like, please watch out for this person on the stairs. Like, don't push them, or anything like that, like horseplay. But I think like the one part that was really hard too was that they took my license for X amount of months just because of possible seizure activity after a TBI. So that kind of like lack of freedom, right, was hard. Didn't really get in the car with anyone else outside of family and the person that I got into the accident with, because he and his family pretty much saved my life afterwards with like calling 911 and everything and getting EMS there and responding quickly. And not only just responding quickly, but also effectively, because they were going to take me to a low trauma hospital. But my buddy's mom is a nurse, and she was like, no, he needs to go here right away because he might be brain dead by the time you get him checked in and sent over. So,
Dang, that's
yeah.
tough. Have you read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits?
Mm-hmm.
Because he got hit in the face with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
And then had to. So I'm wondering, from your standpoint, what were those things that you use? Because I feel like a lot of times we throw out buzzwords like to kind of play off the cliche. We say resilience and things like that. But in those dark times, those difficult times, where did you find inner strength? Like, how did you process that?
Yeah, and I think like this is why I love podcasts, right? It's because you can be really raw and reach millions of people, right? Or thousands of people, hundreds of thousands. So one was in your emotions. Like it came like tapping into the power that's in emotions. Another one was I heard this old, well, I don't know how old it is, so I don't want to say that, but I heard on a YouTube clip of, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000 for like your ancestors. So I found a lot of power in that, given like what, other generations went through, Great Depression. My grandfather was in Korea, like those. So leaning into some of those pieces was huge for me. Also bringing in like spirituality, right? Mindfulness. And then once I got cleared, I was back in the gym. And that's
He's getting back after that physical stuff. I think perspective is super important. And again, I feel like it might be another cliche thing, but that's something I've always drawn on. Like, I lost my dad, and that was super difficult. And my mom's kind of asked me, we had an episode on grief where I pulled my mom onto the show. And she's like, how do you process? And I try to, I guess, go more logically. And I kind of like you had said, I know there's other people that have been through difficult things, and losing a parent is not fun, of course. But I think of this weird example for some reason. I forget in what state it was, but there was the duck boat tour thing. And one of the girls lost her entire family. Like, she went to school or something, or she got, I forgot what happened, but she wasn't on the tour for some reason and stayed back. And then she lost her entire family, like mom, dad, brothers, sisters, like all of them in one day randomly. And like, so I don't want it to compare, like I don't mean it in that way, but there's just so many difficult things, and people do get through and whatnot. So I try to process and I guess become like rational. Like, it's not fun, but there are other difficult things out there. So kind of similar, like you said, we've been through a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I lost my dad too. And it's a lot of, it's interesting, you think about it, or you think about like people passing away, maybe it crosses people's minds. It did for me even before it happened. And then when it comes, it's like nothing that you ever anticipated.
Yeah, and the weird part for me, I don't know if it's just me personally, but the parts that hurt me the most are the smaller things. And I thought that it's always been kind of odd, because I think a lot of people think of like the birthdays and, the big events. And, those are obviously difficult. Like, we just did my sister's wedding earlier this year, and that was pretty difficult. But the ones that catch me for whatever reason are things that don't really matter. They're pretty small in the grand scheme of things. So active duty Air Force, and we went to a different uniform a couple years ago. And I thought it would have been cool to call my dad and be like, oh, we're switching uniforms. It's always kind of a joke. You got to get the new stuff and the sewing, and you got to pay money, and it's out of your own pocket. So it's kind of this inconvenience where you switch uniforms. And it's something that he would know and identify, also being in the Air Force, going from BDUs to ABUs, hopefully not throw out too many acronyms, but when we switch uniforms. And it was just something like, it'd be cool to call and be like, oh, another uniform. It's not a big day. It's not a, monumental thing. But that day I was like, dang, I'd really like to just make that call. That
Yeah,
call like doesn't mean that much.
I know.
Well, I guess it did to me, but
When they
that's
do.
something I think is odd where I think back to your point earlier, like TBI, I guess unrelated, but like just processing humans is difficult. I think we want this cookie cutter A is B is C and this perfect flow chart roadmap thing. And that's just not how we work. We're all just a little bit different. Like
We
I
are.
remember I hadn't drove stick shift in a while and I was out in Japan on the other side of the car and I was driving to work in my new car that happened to be a stick shift and I lost my grandpa many years before that. But I remember sitting in this old, I think beat up Toyota or Nissan or whatever it was on a dirt road and going into first and going into first and going into first because he wouldn't let me go second, third, fourth until I'd figured out first because that's the most difficult one because after that you can go through the gears pretty easily.
Mhm.
And my drive to work, I realized like I'm enjoying this thing where I love to shift through the gears as a 30, whatever, 35-year-old male, you know?
Mhm.
And all that is because a grandpa sat with me and did that a long, long time ago. And so those moments for me are like, oh, I was just crushed. I sat in the parking lot when I got to work and just bawled because it's
Yeah.
like he put the time in, you know?
Right. Yeah, I know. I get those too. Even with recently moving back from Colorado back to my home state in Wisconsin, and being like, oh, like this is the last house my dad remembers us being in. Or like we don't have any memories in the new house with him. Like just those weird things show up, and it's not like you said, it's not always these big things like birthdays or holidays. It's just like, oh, like I remember seeing him in the driveway shoveling snow when I was watching him from the front window.
Yeah, it's crazy. I guess like maybe you're prepared, maybe mentally, and you know the birthdays and stuff are coming up. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But the unexpected have
Yeah.
been pretty tough. But I wanted to ask another question. We kind of talked about the inner strength, but
Mhm.
something else I was curious about, and I really like to try to push these on the show, is practical advice. I think on a lot of books and different stuff, they talk about a lot of hypotheticals and things like that. But I think actionable tips are super important. So, was there something you took away, a lesson you learned that was completely unexpected over the course of the time that someone could use or find light in?
Yeah, I think one going back to the be patient stuff. It's not just like TBI recovery or grief, but you can't rush the process. Be it entrepreneurship, be it whatever it is, right? Like you just have to like be in it and go while you're trudging through. Like there's not going to be a perfect bridge that sees you through this whatever storm you're in. Two, you need to do things that challenge you, right? And that ultimately builds your grit, right? Because we will, like you said, like we don't know when people are going to die. Usually it's unexpected. Even if it's expected, it's still going to be painful. Or we're going to be hit, traumatic brain injury, whatever it is, cancer, right? Like we need to build up some of that backbone, some of that internal strength, that resilience, whatever you want to call it, right? Grit, so that we can just go through because nobody else will do it for us.
I think that's a super important reminder too. I know I've mentioned on the show, but I'll beat that dead horse. Is like you build resilience after hard things. I think a lot of times we use it as like this buzzword that you get for free. It's in your Happy Meal or something. Like,
Right.
no, that comes from the difficult thing. Then you get to look back and be like, I'm still alive. I did that thing. I'm good. And that's one thing, like, I'm super appreciative of the military, even though there are difficult times and things like that. Moving every couple years and finding out how to register your car in Japan versus the UK, or these little things where it's like minor inconveniences, but I know that I can just keep pushing and try to figure these things out. And so when I did lose my dad or my grandparents or things like that, definitely wasn't fun, was not enjoyable, but like that you can process these things. So I kind of appreciate the difficult times that I've had with all the different moves and having to go TDY or go on work trips and deployments and things like that. Like those things like get you the grit that you need. It doesn't come for free. So I think
Doesn't
it's
you
a
earn it?
super good reminder.
Yeah, you earn it. That's for sure. And it doesn't have to be. I'm not. I'm not saying like climb Everest, right? And everyone's Everest is different, right? For me, when I was in the ICU, it was taking my first steps, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes that's where people are, right? It doesn't mean running 30 miles. It means maybe just walking half a mile, but starting.
Yeah, start with the little stuff, right? I think it's another good reminder that's been on the show a few times is like, I think a lot of times people want this Herculean effort to like fix their lives. And really, it's the first step. And again, back to cliches, but I mean, if it's true, it's true. You got to walk the lap around the neighborhood first, or, whatever it is. We're not going to be jumping into 26.2 miles or the
Right.
Barkley Marathon I keep reading about. It's 100 miles.
Yep.
5 20-mile laps in the woods of Tennessee. Like, you're probably not going to go do that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a piece where like our lives don't change in an instant. They usually don't always deteriorate in an instant either. It's the small things.
Yeah, absolutely. Your next pillar is trauma therapy. So
Yeah.
we'll jump into the path to healing. So, what has the role of therapy played in your personal healing journey?
Yeah, so I needed to hit the counseling, especially for some of that like self anger that was showing up around after those concussions and having an outlet for that. Working out was good, but you can't work out all the time. And I think working out does great at like releasing energy. But then there's also like this cognitive piece that like working out sometimes doesn't always touch. It can if if you're really good at like self talk or like you have friends that you can connect with. But for me, that wasn't enough. So I needed to get some extra help. And, I remember walking out of some of those sessions feeling like I had like 16 bricks off my back. And it was just like the day was brighter. Like I could like think clearer. It was so interesting.
But then sometimes they're difficult too, right? Like, I think that's another thing, we just talked about. Like, it's difficult to go through and peel back things that are difficult and are hurting you and things like that. So you will get to the outcome, but do you have any advice on trying to push through some of the times where you're like, I don't want to go, I don't want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is be open and be curious. And I say that one from a therapeutic standpoint as I'm a therapist, because being curious, especially when we talk about like nervous system dysregulation, it's very hard to be curious when we're in a dysregulated state, because typically when we're in a dysregulated state, it's because there's something wrong. So our body is sensing threat or discomfort, and we lose that ability to be curious, right? Like if we're sensing threat, we don't need to be curious about like what it is. We need to be responding, right? We can't be like, oh, let's go check behind this corner or let's be open to this, right? So when we lose that curiosity, it's kind of a sign inside of our brain that, hey, I'm starting to switch nervous system states, right? So by being curious, we can just kind of like disarm some of those defense mechanisms that we already built up. Maybe it's looking tough. Maybe it's caring how other people are going to judge you, right? But if you're curious and you're just open, kind of just opens those doors.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So earlier you said there's no cookie cutter, everyone's a little bit different. So we've talked a lot about you as the patient, I guess, for lack of a better term, flipping the hats from a counselor standpoint. How do you begin to figure out what treatment a person needs? And can you kind of walk us through what those beginning stages if someone's like, hey, I'm going to go talk to somebody, but I'm
Yeah.
apprehensive? What does the kind of the beginning of that session look like? Sessions, I guess.
Yeah, so the first few sessions are usually just like getting through like intake stuff, formalities, building a relationship of trust, essentially. Like, can I help you regulate? Can you help me regulate? And I mean regulate just via the nervous system through neuroception. Our nervous system is constantly sensing, and I think a beautiful example of that is like if you've ever walked into a room and no one was talking, but like you kind of like straightened up because you just feel the tension. And that's all nervous system just communicating to your body, right? So we don't need to do that consciously. It just happens through evolution that we've honed those skills. So how can I help that person regulate their nervous system? Just by being present, being calm, right? Being there, and then figuring out what do they want to work on. Because a lot of times people come to therapy and like, yeah, my relationship with my partner sucks. really what's going on in the relationship is something that's happened maybe over many relationships, maybe even as an adolescent when maybe they lost somebody that they care about, so they have a fear of abandonment, right? So they tend to just push people away before they even get that close, right? So really it's noticing those patterns that just repeat and repeat in our lives. That's then when we usually start. I tend to lean towards somatic experiencing therapy as my go-to intervention, just because it's very trauma informed. It can be very slow but potent is how I kind of describe it. And I mean, just the ability to integrate some of these past painful memories while then coming through and feeling confident, feeling having self-trust, right? As you walk out the door, and then go back to your regular lives in X amount of sessions.
So, how do you break the cycle? Because I feel like that's like, I guess that's the core of those things. Like they had something happen, and so then they push people away and they push people away, and then they're, sad that they don't have anybody, but they're pushing people away. I mean, if you already have that built up, and like you said, multiple relationships, I feel like if it's built up, it's harder to break. Or is that just more time working through that to break it?
There can be many more layers if it's happened repeatedly over decades than just, 3 or 4 times in a few years. There can be a lot more guilt, a lot more shame, right? But how somatic experiencing, or SE therapy for short, works is by tracking what's inside the body. So when you start thinking about that guilt, what do you notice? How does your body respond? Where does it go? Where does your body go in terms of tension? Right? Shaking, trembling, fear, right? And then by not only tracking, but then also helping to regulate as that's moving through the nervous system, and then also allowing it to deactivate. And it's when
That
that
makes sense.
deactivation happens, there can be almost like a decoupling that occurs between that behavior and maybe fear, right? Or vulnerability in that behavior, whatever it might be.
That makes sense. Kind of reminds me, I love running with Coach Bennett and the Nike Run app, and he like guides the runs and talks through things. And one of the phrases he says is, "It's about the run, and it's not about the run." And he's talking
Mm.
about kind of offloading some of those things during the run, which I'm curious, like, you have the TBI, it's physically in your brain from, hitting your head and things like that. But how does healing from trauma go beyond just physical recovery?
Think everyone's going to be different in terms of how this answer comes out, right? But yeah, I mean, there's the physical aspect, especially with the traumatic experience, like a physical experience, laceration, stuff like that. But I think the trauma part really comes in terms of how do maybe the distress is what I could do before and what I can't do now, and noticing that and that pain, that grief, whatever it is. And then how do we heal those components, right? Yeah, maybe like for me, there was no way I was going to go be able to hit the bench within a week of being out of the hospital, right? And having to sit in that and figuring out and being patient, and then stepping in back to the bench and just doing the bar, right? And then rebuilding. So that's how I would answer that question. But I feel like there's more to it. Can you repeat the question?
No, I think you touched on it. I think there's just those extra things that go on outside the physical recovery, because obviously your brain and whatnot has to
Yeah.
recover. But I think that, like you said, is probably the most difficult if you've already defined yourself. I know in the military we have a hard time when people go to leave and you've been doing the same thing for 20 years and your definition is that. Like it's
Yeah.
hard to do that. So like if you were a runner or something when you got hit when you were 17 and like that was the definition of you. I mean, I don't know how you process that if that's what you define yourself as.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the mental, physical, the identity, right? There's the emotional piece. There's also can be a spiritual component to healing from trauma, especially if there are religious beliefs around like good things happen to good people, right? Bad things happen to bad people, but like if I'm a good person, why did this happen to me? Right. So it can be almost like a spiritual sense to healing. And then the relational piece too, right? Of how do relationships shift in your life because of this, whatever happened? What are they now? Do their values maybe the value and the significance of the relationship even shifts, right? Maybe before it, you put a lot of weight into who you were as a social person. And now you're kind of like, I need to put more weight into who I am as a human being.
Yeah, that's good. I think we learn a lot from books and things like that, but I feel like for me, I remember and it just, internalizes so much more when I learn it from the world. Is there something from your work that you've learned that might not be in a textbook or you didn't learn along the way through school, but like you just notice it throughout your work?
Yeah, and I think that the human spirit is a lot stronger than what people give it credit for. And I
That's
think
good.
that's
Do you have a
one of
story that goes with that? Someone that bounced back?
I mean, I can't give out individual stuff because of personal health information, but
Yeah.
I mean, just being a therapist and witnessing it, but also too, if you just kind of step back and you look at like, wow, like, what I don't like want to get political or anything, but when you can notice like what people can go through in terms of like the Holocaust and still hold on to their values and love for one another, or even in South Africa, right? Or like the apartheid, I'm forgetting the word apartheid. I can't say it right now. Apologize. The apartheid. I can't remember how to say that, but right. Or even slavery, right?
Yeah, those are some difficult things, and people come together. I always think of like the mass shootings and things like that.
Yeah,
It's crazy how instantly people will grab each other and help each other. They don't know each other. They don't look the same. They don't have the same
right,
background, and
right.
instantly, we'll flip and take care of each other, which is awesome. I just wish we did that all the time. Well, Daniel, your last pillar is healing and moving forward. And like I said, I love practical tips. So I'm curious, what are some daily habits or practice that have helped rebuild your life?
Yeah, so I personally take time um, in solitude. So I think solitude is very different than isolation. I think solitude is something you voluntarily step into. Isolation is more of like retracting, right? So I take time in quiet, peace, I notice, things that I'm grateful for, things that I need to do today, prioritize those things so that there's very like intentional living on my part. Also to regulating my nervous system, because even as a therapist, like I'm not immune to dysregulation. So finding those things that do bring soothing into my body, right? Like I have plants in my office. There's none behind me, as you can see, but throughout here, right? Noticing plants or being in nature, listening to waves, right? Or listening to the wind blow, whatever it might be.
It makes sense. What do
But
you think? I'm sure you've done a bunch of self reflection and things like that. How has your perspective on life, changed from when it happened or maybe right before it and now, as an adult that's been through this difficult situation?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more purpose, right? There's a lot more intention. I mean, I was a 17-year-old, as probably most 17-year-olds, like, don't give a crap, right? It's like they're invincible and stuff. Well, I was showing I'm very not invincible. But then also like, wow, like, not like there's like the second chance to like, do things and really like create positive changes in people's lives. And that's kind of this embodiment and what one of the reasons this has kind of morphed into starting my own therapy practice, right? Is how can I help other people heal, especially men who might struggle with numbness or maybe too much bottled in emotion, right?
Why do you think, and this is completely off topic, but I got to ask, why do
Yeah.
you think men don't get help as much as maybe the other gender?
Yeah. I do think that there is still part of that stigma that exists, right? But that's again pretty I would say probably well known by this time, especially in America. And part of that stigma too, breaking it down is like, what is there fear of vulnerability, right? Is there fear of even facing some of those, challenges, obstacles, or demons that have been just stuffed away? Like, is there like, I can't even, like, there's so much in there I can't even heal. Where do I start, right? And it's like, I know I was in a training maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and it was like, they were like, we still have Vietnam vets coming in white knuckling it, and that that was, and I mean, those Vietnam vets are like in their 70s, 80s, 90s, right? So, but like they're trying it, right? So it's like, why can't we try it? Like, and then also I think, especially in the military or like first responders, I work pretty closely with first responders and those in the military too. But there's the fear of like, what if other people find out? Like, will they look at me differently? Will they see me as weak? Are they going to trust me when the situation gets heated? Right. So all those kinds of variables start to come in.
If the Vietnam vets can do it, I think we should all be able to do it. Well,
Yeah.
Daniel, I'd like to try to bring it all together. If someone listening right now is in the middle of their own recovery journey, what words of encouragement do you have for them?
I would say in a short phrase that this adversity will define you, and just allowing it enough time to do that.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thank you for coming out. I wanted to let you know or ask you where people can connect with you and learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so my practice is Revitalize Mental Health LLC here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm licensed in Wisconsin as well as in Colorado, so I can practice in both states for those listening in those states or know somebody in those states. But revitalizementalhealth.com, Instagram, LinkedIn. I think some of those links will be posted in the notes, so following that link. But
Absolutely. I'll get you all tagged and all connected. But that's it for today's episode. If you found value in this, please let me know on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. Please drop a review. We'll see you next time. I love you all. See ya.